before passing that, I would like to say, since Haji Yahya Chalil-Stakov said, Islam is a grace for humanity, not problems. As the founders of Istanbul Network for Liberty, we believe there, under the human civilization, through the interaction of people, of groups throughout centuries, through commerce relations, through volunteer actions, fundamental institutions like property, like contracts, like institutions of law had developed. And we also believe that in the history of Islam, particularly in the early Islamic experience, we see the establishment of these human institutions. So we need to find this out. So I am going to start quickly the session, but I would like to give 15 minutes to each speaker so that we will have enough time for discussions, for questions as well. So we will start with Dr. Husnul Amin. This session is going to be the first part of discussing Islamic political parties, going to Asia, South Asia part. So we'll have Pakistan and Malaysia issues, cases in this session. So Dr. Amin is the Executive Director of Iqbal International Institute for Research and Dialogue. So we will hear you. Floor is yours, Dr. Amin.
Thank you so much. Good morning and assalamu alaikum. So my presentation actually concerns understanding mainstream Islamism, political Islam, in the Pakistani context through the lens of their electoral manifestos and some of the news statements of the leadership. So I'm focusing on only two mainstream political Islamist parties. One is Jamiat Islami, Pakistan, and the second is Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, which is coming from the Deobandi subscription, Deobandi school. Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, Fazal Rahman group. We know that the Jamiat Islami is one of the oldest Islamist movements in the Muslim world after Ikhwan. Is inspired by Maududi's political ideology of revivalism through the establishment of creating an Islamic state. The JUI, I would call JUI Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, so the short version JUI, F represents the largest political force of traditional Deobandi ulama in contemporary Pakistan. The historical roots of both parties can be traced back to the pre-partition of the subcontinent, which is 1947. So both parties were established before that. The JUIF branched off from the Jamiat Ulema-e-Hind, and the Jamaat Islami was established by Maududi in 1941. The JUIF's organizational structure at all levels, central, provincial, district, is mainly occupied by ulama and madrasa graduates. In the given political landscape in Pakistan, the JI and JIUF together can be safely said to representing mainstream Islamism. Among the Islamic political parties taking part in national and provincial elections, these two parties capture the lion's share of votes. Both represents Sunni Islam. The JI has maintained a non-sectarian identity, providing the space to people of different religious sects to join the party. However, the JUIF mainly accepts membership of those Sunni Muslims that also subscribe to Hanafi Deobandi Islam. For the sake of this chapter, I have also, this paper I have made a distinction between militant and institutional Islamism. So I'm focusing on the institutional Islamism, these two parties, despite their subtle connections with militant Islamism as well, but they mainly take part in elections, they form alliances, they form coalition governments, and so that's why my focus is on the democratic Islamists, the both parties. So if we review the literature on Islamism, it problematically assumes the following things: that Islamism is an uprising against modernism and secular democracy, where Islamic movements and secularism are parallel categories with no point of intersection. Second, Islamism stands for a pure and indigenous culture, which is Islamic, vis-a-vis an impure modernity, which is Western. And third, Islamism is fixed, stagnant, immutable. And fourth, Islamism is essentially incompatible with modernity, democracy, and it consists of angry and irrational actors. So these are mainly the assumptions, but I think we should now go beyond these, and we are going beyond these assumptions now, because the empirical studies are showing us that there's diversity, multiplicity, non-linearity, and there are a variety of Islamist movements all across the world, and these assumptions nowhere actually hold. My current presentation can be divided into three sections. The first section deals with the methodology of my data collection, codification scheme, etc. The second part deals with some of preliminary conclusions, and the third part is, by way of conclusion, I will be discussing some social non-movements within these movements, which I call post-Islamist intellectual trajectories within these Islamist movements. So I'm using manifesto coding scheme to codify the electoral manifestos of both parties and the new statements of the leaders, of their leaders. So first of all, I will discuss some of the methodological portion. So a total number of 8 domains. I'm using a slightly modified version of the manifesto coding scheme. So there were 7 categories, but I'm using 8 categories. The 8 categories added for the Islamic ideology and Sharia, Islamic Sharia. So manifestos of the Islamic political parties reveal their philosophy and pattern for socio-economic change in Pakistan. Like everywhere else in third world politics, there is wide gap between the actual politics of the political parties and their manifesto content. The ambitious goals identified in the manifestos of IPPs may not be reflective of their practices once these parties are in power. Still, this gap between wishful intentions of the political actors and their actual practice do not stop us from analysis. So the Islamic political parties' manifestos and news content statements help us understand their ideal policy, preferences in politics, and thus the kind of socio-political order they intend to create. The present research has employed comparative manifesto projects coding scheme to quantify the JI and JIUF's position on various issues. For the content analysis of both these parties, 2 main sources have been identified. The JI and JIUF's electoral manifestos of 1997 and the news content that ranges from 1988 to 2006. So the 8 categories which I have used in this discussion, I will now come to some of the main conclusions, so that main findings. The 8 categories include external relations, which is further subdivided into subcategories like anti-imperialism, military defense, peace, internationalism, pan-Islamism, foreign policy. Then the second category is freedom and democracy, which is further divided into freedom and human rights, and then democracy, constitutionalism, etc. The third domain includes political system, which relates to government and administrative efficiency, corruption and accountability, decentralization, provincial autonomy, and centralization. The fourth economy deals with economy, which is further subdivided into subcategories: free enterprise, incentives, market, regulation, protection, economic planning, general economic goals, technology, infrastructure, etc., nationalization and privatization. The fifth category is welfare and quality of life. So then it is further divided into social justice, culture, welfare, state expansion, education expansion, environmental protection, etc. The sixth category includes, which is about fabric of society, includes social harmony, law and order, anti-feudalism, land reform, anti-capitalism. The seventh category is about social groups, and then it is further divided into labor groups, farmers, underprivileged and minority groups, professional groups, youth, gender, and other social groups. And then the final category deals with Islamic ideology and Sharia, which includes then Islamic economy, Islamic banking, Islamic morality, Islamization in general. So these are the 8 domains, and I have used the manifesto content through a very rigorous codification scheme, and then counted how much, empirically counted how much attention each category is receiving. So just briefly, I would say that in the JI case, the Jamaat Islami case, external relations is receiving like 22% of its share, its attention. In the JIUI case, it is around 18%. The freedom and democracy is only 5% in the Jamaat Islami case, and it is 7% in the Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam case. Political activism and related things received 40% share in the JI case, and around 42% the JUIF case. Social activism and social groups and welfare, it received only 9% in the JI case and only 7%, around 7% in the JUI case. And then social fabric of society, only 5% in the JI case and 6% around in the JUI case. So if I just compare what are the 3 main issues that stand out in their manifestos as well as their news content. So in the JI case, the foremost issue is the social groups, the labor, trade unions, and different groups, gender and others. The JUI case is Islamic ideology stands out the most important. The second issue is the social fabric in Jamaat Islami's case, while it is, again, the social fabric in the JUI case as well. So economy is the third important issue. If I if I select 3 most important issues, so economic issues stand out as the third important issue in their discussion. In the news content covered during 1988 to 2006, the JI deals more about political system, corruption, efficiency of the government. It deals with 40% of its share is captured by that, and 42% by the JUI. Then external relations, anti-imperialism, questions related to the US hegemony, etc. It is around 22% in the JI case and 18% in the JUIF case. And then is the case with jihad and Sharia and other activisms. So since I don't have much time to share all results, but these were some of the preliminary results. What actually it shows is actually diversity in issues. So they are not engaged only in Sharia and Islamic ideology and like that discussion, but their discussion can be further broken down into 8 categories, and that actually tell us about. And then the thing is, if we take a time series look over the data, then I have noticed that there is a major shift in the discussion as well. So the discussion on jihad and Islamic ideology has actually shifted more to concrete issues related to provincial autonomy, share in resources, and then very issues which relate to development and developmentalism. So there is a huge shift in their political discourse issue-wise. Finally, by way of conclusion, I would like to highlight two things. One is overall, in both cases, but in the mainstream Islamist, which is the Jamiat Islami, we find a culture of anti-intellectualism. So most of the new ideas, new intellectual discussions, they are not only discarded and discouraged, but most new intellectual voices are expelled. And I have a data set now that at every decade, actually whatever new intellectual ideas, what new intellectual production is produced within the Jamaat, those all scholars have been expelled from that. It created an intellectual deficit, and which is actually has dried up all its resources to strengthen it, to give it new ideas, as we were just listening to, on very key pertinent questions. So this is one of the main findings. The second is, this is about my recent data collection, and I'm still doing a field work on that. But this is, I found a kind of post-Islamist social non-movements within these movements. So social non-movements are actually, social non-movements are organized, unorganized, following Bayat's definition, organized, unorganized activities, and these we can call interpretive communities and discourse communities. So there are middle classes, entrepreneurs, youth, professors, who actually who remain within the movement, but then they are not satisfied with the way they are dealing with these key questions, Islam, state, society, relationships. So there is a huge discussion going on within those movements, but that discussion is taking place within drawing rooms, within their private spheres, and that discussion is very important because it is potent for a vibrant change in future. I can see that. That discussion is much richer in content in the Deobandi school, especially the youth and the new ulama, and it is actually not that much richer in the mainstream political Islam, which is Jamaat Islami. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We will continue during the question part as well. I think the studies through electoral manifestos are very important, because in our societies, to have mature democracies, indeed a competitive democracy, we need political parties to recognize that they have to compete in the system. So they need to accept the rules of the system, rules of the game, the competitive democracy, and they need to understand the needs of the society, and they need to work on their electoral manifestos. So those political parties who work neatly on these would succeed in elections. So that has been the case for Turkey indeed. Those political parties who take care of their manifestos succeed, and those who do not care of their manifestos mean they do not care of the people and also rules of the game. So thank you for this presentation. It reminded important issues. So one, if you don't mind, I would like to continue with Pakistan, not to interrupt the thinking within Pakistan, so then we can shift to Malaysia. Is it okay with you as well? Okay, thank you. Now Fida Rahman from Qurtuba University of Science from Pakistan is going to speak on Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam in Pakistan, from political conservatism to modernity. So you will talk more to the contemporary times.
Okay.
So you have
Thank
your
you so much.
presentation there? Okay. You have 15 minutes.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. My topic is about the Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, Fazal Rahman, Pakistan, and their journey from political conservatism to modernity. It is a case study from 2002 to 2007. Besides few exceptions, Muslim societies as a whole have been alien to the ideal and modern concept of democracy. One of the main reasons of anti-democracy approach is due to the colonial regimes and their political systems ruled over the Muslim majority countries during the colonial era. Muslim scholars and intellectuals have been playing a pivotal role in shaping the understanding of masses both in favor and against the concept of democracy, like Maulana Maududi.
Just a little away. Okay.
JUI is fine now?
Yes, I think so.
JUI Pakistan has been going through inevitable political shifts and ideological transformations due to various social, political, and religious reasons. Once a staunch supporter of Afghan Taliban and militant groups is now supporting the cause of peaceful political change and implementation of Sharia through state machinery by taking part in democratic process. Various events in the past and present show its transition from a politically conservative and exclusivist religious political party into a more vibrant and inclusive political party, having room for engaging previously violent militant organizations like Sipahi Sahaba Pakistan and inclusive political approach towards religious minorities in Pakistan. Although some of the scholars of Deoband still favor militant groups and support their cause like Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, Simul Haq group, but JUIF is an exception in this case. The overall political role of the party may not be totally and ideally democratic, but the events show their in-depth understandings of the ongoing political shifts and ground realities taking place at regional and global level. An attempt has been made to study and analyze the role of JUI Pakistan with reference to the important shifts in their political approach and ideology. Dr. Amin has made my task more easier for me, and I'm going to skip their historical background and their internal organizational structure. I'm going to the main components of my presentation. One of them is enforcement of Sharia through ballot or bullet. This is a very important discussion that is going on in Pakistan, and we have been facing the dire consequences of enforcement of Sharia in Pakistan. It is believed that the religious political parties have been posing a threat to democratic reforms and development by having potential violent opposition, but the overall political role of JUI seems quite different. Unlike the militant groups of Pakistan like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and its subgroups, JUI has always emphasized peaceful political change and enforcement of Sharia by taking active part in democratic process and strengthening democratic culture and institutions instead of meddling into direct and violent conflict with the civil and military institutions. Such militant groups tried to kill Maulana Fazal Rahman and assassinated hundreds of members, including parliamentarians and scholars affiliated with JUI, including renowned religious scholars and men of letters Maulana Hassan Jan, Maulana Mirajuddin, and quite recently a suicide attack on the General Secretary of JUI and the currently serving Deputy Chairman of the Senate of Pakistan, Maulana Abdul Ghafoor Haidari, for not, and the only reasons of attacks and the assassination is that they are not owning to the jihadist ideology ideology and strategy of the militant groups in taking part in the un-Islamic political system, that is democracy, according to the religious understanding of the militants. Although democracy was considered as something alien to Islam and a manifestation of the Western agenda of subjugating Islam and Muslims, but JUI has dramatically changed the point of view and understanding of a lot of traditional religious scholars regarding the democracy to a great extent. Basically, they are not against the democratic and popularly elected system of governance because the party constitution itself manifests their democratic approach. It states that all important decisions shall be made on the basis of majority opinion. A new development has been taking place that exclusivist social reformist movements like the Sufi scholar Pir Zulfikar Ahmad, basically a Sufi scholar, leading a large number of Deobandi Muslims having inclination towards spirituality, and Tablighi Jamiat, that is a reformist movement of Deobandi school of thought, solely established and dedicated to the preaching of Islam at grassroots level. Both these scholars and their parties are in close contact with Maulana Fazlur Rahman, the head of the JUI, and are showing their interest in the democratic system of Pakistan by voting JUI. JUI seems inclined to the development of democratic process by not joining movements like Defy Pakistan Council, that is an alliance of pro-establishment and religious, political and jihadist parties that was basically formed after the civil-military tension on some security and defense issues during the period of Pakistan People's Party. The same approach was witnessed in the recent tussle between civilian government and military establishment under the disguise of Panama Papers case, in which the Supreme Court of Pakistan disqualified Mia Muhammad Nawaz Sharif for the position of premiership, although he was elected through popular majority votes. JUI preferred to favor and defend the civilian government instead of towing the line of establishment, as it was done by Jamaat Islami and other pro-establishment religious political parties. JUI is going through democratic transition within the party as well, although it still needs to foster the democratic culture in party, but it will take more time and it will be able to adopt it with the passage of time and gradually. Diverse opinions are voiced about the weakness and strengths in the organizational structure of the JUI and have been labeled as a party of clergy and madrasa graduates only, but it is a fact that they appointed a person like Akram Khan Durrani as the Chief Minister of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is a province of Pakistan, who is not a religious person or a graduate madrasa in real sense. Instead, previously, Akram Khan Durrani had political affiliation with a secular and nationalist political party, namely Awami National Party, before joining the JUI. And moreover, the last general elections in Pakistan in 2013 and the local government elections in 2015 witnessed another shift in the political outlook of the leadership of JUI. They nominated such candidates who do not sport popular religious symbols like beard, turban, certain dress, etc. I also observed that all three constituencies in my districts were allocated to members of local elite families instead of the graduates of madrasas. The same trend was also observed in local bodies election throughout Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The second component of the discussion is their approach about their choice in militancy versus democracy. The very first article of the 2013 Election Manifesto of JUI starts with the establishment, with the statement that peace will be our primary priority in politics. distancing itself from the pro-establishment political movements and joining hands with those favoring smooth and continuous democratic process, it shows that JUI has adopted the policy of bringing change through democratic process instead of joining hands with militant and jihadist groups. Consequently, the party has been facing the dire consequences in shape of assassination attempts on the top leadership, parliamentarians, scholars, and activists. Even though the party sacrificed a lot of well-learned and knowledgeable religious scholars, seasoned parliamentarians, and devoted activists, but it never resorted to retaliate in same coin. Instead, it motivates its members to keep trust in the democratic transition that requires long-term strategy with patience and sacrifice instead of adopting the short-term acts of violence and militancy by terrorizing the masses and engaging in an unnecessary armed struggle against the military and armed forces of the country. The third point is their political approach about sectarianism and their choice in sectarianism versus pluralism. History witnessed a divide in JUI due to the pluralist approach of Maulana Fazlur Rahman, and a new violent and militant, basically anti-Shia group came into being, namely Sipai Sahaba Pakistan. SSP, Sipai Sahaba Pakistan, emerged as a defender of the religious position and dignity of the pious companions of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as a reaction to the organized campaign of defaming and disrespecting the companions by few extremist Shia scholars in Pakistan. It hurt the religious sentiments of those hardliners, and they started reacting with the same coin and eventually resorted to violent struggle against Shia community in Pakistan. But Maulana Fazlur Rahman never favored their understanding and strategy of dealing with the issue. Consequently, he was criticized and even attacked by the fanatics, but he distanced himself from the anti-Shia approach. That is why a considerable number of Shia community in his native districts, Dera Ismail Khan, cast their votes in favor of Maulana Fazlur Rahman in almost every election. Due to his pluralist political approach, he also gains the favors of Barelvi voters as well, that is the majority religious community of the district. It has been witnessed in recent years that leadership of the same anti-Shia militant group, that is Sipai Sahaba Pakistan, have been taking part in the democratic transitions like Maulana Ahmad Ludhiani, one of the top leaders of Sipai Sahaba, has been one of the close affiliates of Maulana Fazlur Rahman, and recently Maulana Masroor Nawaz Jangvi, who is the son of the renowned anti-Shia scholar Maulana Haq Nawaz Jangvi, who was the founder of SSP, working is Ahle Sunnat wal Jamaat now, and recently he won the by-election in Punjab after being convinced by Maulana Fazlur Rahman about the need and importance of democracy in Pakistan and hazardous impacts of sectarianism, extremism, and violence for almost all segments of the country, including religious segment. After winning the by-elections, it is very interesting that he not only joined JUI, as well as publicly distanced himself from the anti-Shia rhetoric. The fourth component of the discussion is their perspective on the political participation of women. The sense of gender segregation based on a specific understanding of Islam is still exists in JUI, is the party constitution has nothing regarding the women, youth and minorities. Their elections manifesto of 2013 contains few promises regarding the rights of women, youth and minorities. Like it states that women would be made equal citizens, bringing at par with their male counterpart in all walks of life, and women in all state affairs and in all spheres will be equally treated with their male counterparts. Although they oppose the role of women as a political leader in past, but they have been changing their perspective gradually. They not only allowed their own women being members of the parliament and provincial assemblies on reserved seats, as well as they unanimously voted in favor of Miss Fahmida Mirza. She was the first female speaker of the National Assembly of Pakistan. They have a women wing led by Miss Naima Kishwar. Their perspective about the minority right is very interesting and changing as well. JUI leadership organized recently a 3-day conference and invited leaders of almost all political parties, ambassadors of various countries, and more importantly, the Bishop of Pakistan as well. Just a moment. It was first political gathering organized by a religious political party in which a non-Muslim representative was not only invited but given opportunity of sharing his view with the gathering. I can conclude that democracy requires pragmatic, passionate and well-balanced political leadership for its development and survival in an ideal form. It accommodates itself with almost every culture of the world if its ideal and actual concept and principles are kept in mind. Islam does not contradict democracy, rather it recommends a pluralist and vibrant political system. JUI understands the need and importance of democracy in Pakistan. It has been witnessed as an advocate of democracy and democratic ideals, even in very tough situations and military regimes. Instead of becoming an opportunist political force, it has not only distanced itself from violent and militant groups, but discouraged its followers to join any political movement that leads towards violence and undemocratic efforts of getting reins of government. Similarly, it merged anti-Shia hardliners in its lines and convinced them to trust in the democratic culture and pluralism instead of following foreign agendas of fomenting violence and creating social disorder and political anarchy. The party has a long journey ahead. It needs to acquaint itself with the ideal form of democracy within the ranks of party and outside the party. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You outlined an interesting example of transformation of a political party and their main titles we'll discuss. So our third speaker is Saiful He is also the president of the chairman of ISEAS and also the chairman of Istanbul Network for Liberty. Now he is also a senior visiting fellow in Singapore. He is going to speak about the evolution of Islamism in Malaysia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. This is a humbling experience speaking in front of so many great scholars, and especially Pak Yahya, whose membership in his organization is bigger than the population of Malaysia. So this is a really humbling experience. But the task given to me to speak about the case study of Malaysia, and I'm going to focus on the Islamic Party of Malaysia past and the recent split that was experienced by the party leading towards the formation of another party, National Trust Party, or called Amanah. So the focus is on the two political parties, but I'm going to start with a very general overview, and that is by saying that in Malaysia today, if you look at the situation, oh, by the way, the paper for this presentation is there in the pack that you have. It's on page 142 to 142 to about 160 something, and you know, the bulk of the content is there. I'm just going to summarize that for you. The thinking in Malaysia today, many people will talk, whenever they talk about the political parties, the political Islamist movement in Malaysia, they will talk about two different strands of ideas. One is the conservative thinking, and another is the progressive thinking. Now, if you want to define the word conservatism in Malaysia, this is more traditionalist. This is a group that's more traditionalist in their approach. They work within the established bureaucracy, and they tend to align themselves to the power structure. So in the context of Malaysia today, in terms of those with actual influence to power, it will be the conservative group. But there is also another group that is more, that's quite often labeled as the progressive group. If you look into history, these are the more activist type of individuals. They are more grassroots based and they're not quite aligning themselves with power. The term progressive, I think, is rather misleading one. There's one scholar who has written about this, and he used what I think is a more interesting, more accurate term in describing this progressive group. He calls them as neoconservative. And the reason for that is, in terms of ideology, they are still essentially the same. Both groups are still conservative in nature. The difference is the so-called progressive bringing in new ways of implementing the conservative ideas into society. And if you go back into history, this debate between this, I'm going to use the term progressive because this is the more widely used one, but just for the sake of being accurate, I think that is not the best term to use. I do think neoconservative is more accurate one from a more academic perspective. But if you trace the history of Malaysian politics and Malaysian Islamist political thought, you will see that this whole discussion started in the early 1900s. You can go back into history much further than that, but in modern sense, it starts in the early 1900s when there's a split between a group called the Kaum Tua and Kaum Muda. Kaum Tua means the older generation, Kaum Muda means the younger generation. It's not because of age, but it is more because of how society interprets their thinking at that time. So old, traditional, conservative, young, referring to the more progressive, more rational, rationalist type of individuals. Now, from the early 1900s, you go to the year mid 1940s. The debate between the two somehow converged into the formation of one political party. This is more or less the first time Islamist ideas are translated into a political force. And that is a political party called Hizbul Muslimin. It was formed in the late 1940s. It was very quickly banned by the British government at that time, governing Malaysia. And it was replaced by a party in 1951 called the Islamic Party of Malaysia, PAS. So that was the history of PAS, and most people would attribute the formation of the Islamic Party of Malaysia, PAS, to the rise of more rationalist, more activist type of movement. But the reality is, at that time, the two forces, the two different groups actually converged to form this party. But PAS, to summarize very quickly, this is skipping through very many parts of history here. But if you look through the history of PAS, I would suggest that there are two major things that happen in the evolution of the party. One is the injection from the conservative entity that it was to start with. One was the injection of leftist nationalism into the ideology of the party. This happened in the year 1956, 1957, all the way to the early 1960s, when the president at that time, the third president of the party, Burhanuddin Al-Helmi, actually, he actually said, he was recorded to say that he took over the presidency of the party, and I'm quoting him here. The full quote is available in the paper. I'm quoting him here. He actually said that the reason why he took up the presidency is it would be easier for me to inject a leftist soul into the party. So when Burhanuddin Helmi took over the presidency in 1956, he was very clear. He wanted to bring it to the left. And that, what to me, was the beginning of the process of centralization of power. The leftists, in this context, basically believe that the government should do more and not so much leaving it to the individuals. Then come the late 1970s, Iranian Revolution, and Islamists in Malaysia were inspired by the Iranian Revolution, especially some big group of people within the Islamic Party of Malaysia, within PAS. There's one person who became president in the year 1982, that is Yusuf Rawah. I think his grandson is actually somewhere here, I'm not sure. He was here yesterday. Yes, he is here, sitting quietly at the back there. So Yusuf Rawah became president of the party in 1982, and during his term, in addition to being the leftist nationalist party, he brought in, saying this would make many people in the party dislike me, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think he introduced this idea of authoritarianism within the party. And not only did he introduce the idea, he actually institutionalized it. What he did was, number one, he allowed some of the radical firebrands of the Islamist movement at that time to really gain grounds and become holders of various different positions. One of them, Abdul Hadi Awang, is currently the president of the party. In the year 1981, he actually introduced something called the Amanat Haji Hadi, the Edict of Haji Hadi, in which he clearly says that fighting against us in the Islamic Party of Malaysia is wrong from an Islamic point of view, because what we are doing as members of the Islamic Party of Malaysia is we're fighting against the infidel. So he introduced the idea that the fight of the Islamic Party of Malaysia is not just merely a political fight, it is a jihad. It is a jihad against infidel ideas and the kuffar ideas, and this is the beginning of a very different trajectory for the party. Under the presidency of Yusuf Rawah, he also introduced two other things that institutionalized the positions of the scholars, the more conservative, radical scholars. Number one, he introduced this concept of leadership by ulama, the leadership by scholars. And not only did he introduce the concept, he even institutionalized it by introducing a structure called the Majlis Shura Ulama, the Ulama Shura Council. And the chair of that Shura Council is called the Murshidul Am. You know, you can easily see the resemblance with what happened in Iran under this. This was where the influence came from. So what happened under in past, over the course of the several decades, was initially it was set up when the two groups worked together, but the grassroots level is still very conservative. Eventually the leftist nationalist ideas came in, and then came the introduction, the institutionalization of that central power structure justified by religious verses. And you fast forward that to the year 1990s, when Malaysia as a whole experienced a very turbulent time politically. In 1998, the Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim was sacked from his office and also sacked from the Deputy Presidency of the party. He's not from the Islamic Party of Malaysia, although PAS was really hoping that he would join them back in the 1980s, but he decided to join the ruling coalition, the United Malay National Organisation that Hassan touched on yesterday, UMNO. And he became Deputy Prime Minister as well as Deputy President of the party, but he was sacked in 1998. Let's not get into the details of this, but that whole saga really changed the scenario in Malaysian politics. And PAS was a big beneficiary of this, because PAS was positioning themselves as the alternative to the ruling coalition for the Muslim Malays. So if you're not happy with Anwar's sacking, while Anwar was building his party, the platform for you is PAS. And many of them joined the party, and this was a time when the more progressive elements in Malaysia, not 1 minute yet. This was a time when the many progressive elements in Malaysia started joining the Islamic Party, started joining PAS. And PAS benefited from this whole saga, from this whole scenario. And it was also the time, if you look at the period between 1998, maybe until 1998 to 2015, maybe 1998 to about 2010, many people were still saying that, were arguing, were putting forward arguments that PAS has changed. From a conservative party that it became a progressive party. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I want to suggest that this is a wrong assumption. This is the wrong thinking. PAS has never changed. What the conservative in PAS simply did was to allow the progressive to come in, hold various different positions, act as the poster boys to get the non-Muslim votes. And when they became a challenger to the leadership by ulama concept, when they became a little bit too influential compared to the ulama and the scholars, they were kicked out. And this was exactly what happened in the year 2015. In 2015, in the Muktamar, in the AGM, Annual General Meeting, where the party election was held, the Conservative completely routed off the Progressive from the party. They won no position in the party, not just at the central level. They were gradually kicked out and sidelined in the whole party structure nationally at division, state and branch levels. And that led to the Progressive in past who were, putting forward this facade that past has changed. That led the Progressive to realize that actually maybe past is not our place. So let's leave the party completely and form a new party. And this gave birth to a party called Amanah, Parti Amanah Negara, National Trust Party. National Trust Party, or Amanah, claims to be inspired by Rashid Ghanouchi's concept of Muslim Democrats. And this is what they say. They are championing the idea of Muslim Democrats. Ghanouchi himself has changed his views since then, but Amanah is sticking with that view. To summarize, I only have 3 minutes left. That led to a situation where in Malaysia today we have two political parties. We have PAS, the Islamic Party of Malaysia, who's clearly conservative in their line of thinking, and Amanah, who's still trying to build the basis for themselves and claiming the mantle of being the party for progressive Muslims or progressive ideas within Islam. The debate between the two, because it was not an amicable divorce, it was an angry divorce. So even though they are both on the opposition side, they're still fighting each other, forgetting that the real enemy is on the other side. This is why I was asking the question just now. If you're calling for people to get together, even among themselves, they're not clearly united. In the case of Malaysia, I think the key lesson here is when there is a common enemy, Muslims, especially those who are advocating for political struggle, when there's a common enemy, they can work together. As soon as there is not a common enemy, they will face challenges because the differences and ideologies is quite clear. One is conservative and another one is rather progressive in their thinking. And this can be traced back well back into our history. It's not just the early 1900s in Malaysia. The debate between the Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Ra'i has been happening for hundreds of years and it has never been resolved. I'm not sure if it can be resolved. And this poses a real challenge for us. The case study of Malaysia has shown, I think, that working together is really difficult and it's really challenging. Even when a party like PAS tried to bring together the different schools of thought, it didn't work and it resulted in a split that's now two political parties. The interesting part in Malaysia is it is not just about political struggle anymore, and I think this is the part that gives hope to many people. The progressive ideas is taken up by civil society as well. And even if the Progressive Parti Amanah does not succeed, I think progressive ideas will remain, because among civil society organizations, there are quite a few of them, and there are also progressive individuals who are really playing their roles. The names are listed in the paper, some names of the groups are listed as well. I also included the name of Istanbul Network for Liberty in that because it's registered as an organization in Malaysia. And I think this is where the hope relies. For those who are promoting more progressive ideas, it should not be completely reliant on political parties, but civil society plays an important role as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan, for keeping on time. Thank you. You raised good points about the influence of working together over the political system and the political climate. So we have 20 minutes for discussion, for questions, for opening up more about the presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please try to be concise, as short as possible.
Hello, thank you. I'm Sharul from Bersih. 3 questions. First question for our Pakistani friends. One, what is the forecast of growth for Jamiatul Islami or Jamaat Islami in Pakistani politics? Because when I look at the number of seats in the Senate or the National Assembly, it is relatively small as compared to the Pakistani People's Party and Pakistani Muslim League, even the Pakistan Tehreek Al-Ihsan, Imran Khan's party. So what is the forecast? The reason I'm saying this is sometimes if we consider ourselves as Islamists, we tend to think that we are big, but actually in reality, we are not that big as compared to the population. Second question, what is Pakistani's role and future in SAARC, the Southern bloc, Southern Asian bloc? SAARC. I mean, in the democratic sphere, Southern Asia is 20% of the population in the world, and in many conferences and meetings, India, and namely Sri Lanka, has been commended as a good reference for democracy. But what about the rest, and how are you working, especially Pakistan, in this domain? Third question to my honorable friend, Wan Saiful. There has been a paradigm shift of Islamization in Malaysia since the 80s, from the times of Amanah Hadi and now. Somehow Islam has become a trend, and everybody has been misuse or abuse of Islam. You mentioned Ghanouchi, even the state of the day, the government of the day has brought Ghanouchi, and Ghanouchi has made statements commending the government. Can you comment on this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you also introduce yourself?
Yeah, I have a name. My name is Wahabuddin Rais. I'm from International Islamic University, Malaysia. But I'm a neighbor of my two colleagues, two friends here. I'm coming from Afghanistan. I'm from the Jalalabad city. And I lived in Peshawar for a long period of time. Now, study of manifestos. If a manifesto cannot translate itself into public support, then to what extent that manifesto will be good for an academic study like this? Looking at Jamaat Islami and Jamaat Ulema of Pakistan, and obviously you put the Fazal group, and then you have so many division into this. It is not something new that Jamaat Ulema or Jamaat Islami has basically shifted its policy and joined the political process. So since the time I have left, and I have been as a refugee in Pakistan, these two political parties are part of the political process, and they do take part in the elections. But we do see that they don't have basically much of a public support. Given Pakistan as a Muslim state, given Pakistan as majority constitute and even created in the name of Islam, as you have said, we find that basically the public support for these political parties are not there. Now, have they shifted themselves from the bullet to the ballot? One would really wonder about this, because it is the same political party which was supporting militant, and until today it's supporting militancy across the border. So it won an Islamic state in Afghanistan, but it want to collaborate with the seculars and others. And I think you rightly mentioned that the madrasa graduates are not welcome in the ballot box. And therefore Akram Khan Durrani, who was basically to you a kind of secular someone else, and today become the NWFP chief minister, that in itself telling that the agenda of the Islamist political party. Very lastly, what is I have seen Jamaat Islami and Jamaat Ulema, they go both. into elections, talk to others. They can easily collaborate with secular parties, but I have not seen the two to really collaborate within themselves. And I think even, I don't know, a quote stands that the Jamaat ulama basically has a label against Maududi and consider Maududi not even a Muslim. So how do you settle these type of problems in the so-called majority Muslim state? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ali, and so both, both Van Saiful and Husnul Amin in their presentation made a common point that the Islamist political parties have maybe not tolerated difference of opinion that much, and even if in the case of PAS it allowed progressives to come in and then it sort of expelled, and you have also said that Jamaat-e-Islami also did the same. So I see this as a common tendency perhaps in political Islam or those parties which are claiming Islam as a major anchor point. And if that is the case, that is the lack of tolerance of new progressive ideas, then can we also say that this is an inherent weakness in so-called political Islam structure because of association of political ideas with religion and the lack of tolerance of difference of opinion, and therefore also it puts a structural cap on the growth of it, and it's also its weakness itself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Wong Chin Huat from Fida Institute. I have two questions for my good friend, Wan Saiful. The first question, your presentation almost ignored UMNO, which I think is the important part of the story. PAS was the dominant Malay opposition party from 1959 to 2008, with a brief period of exception in late 70s and early 90s. It had finished off two splinter parties. And by 1982, when it reoriented to Islamism, it successfully forced UMNO into the competition to out-Islam each other. And that's where we are today. Your conclusion was very optimistic to say that if even Amanah is crushed, the progressive idea would survive. How sure are you that progressive idea will survive if PAS can claim to be the standard bearers of all things Islam? It is perhaps the most authoritarian party in terms of intra-party structure. That's my first question. Second question is a bit historical.
But
Yeah, going to be very brief. But it's important because go back to your thesis. PAS between Dr. Burhanuddin and Yusuf Rawa under Asri Muda was a Malay nationalist party with a bit of Islamic color. In 1969, the shift was not actually desertions of Chinese from the ruling coalition, but a shift in the peninsula, 9 percentage points from alliance to PAS. UMNO to PAS share dropped from 5 to 2 in 1964 to 3 to 2, which basically means that the situation was almost right for formulations of a two-party system if there was not a riot. But how likely is that given the ideological setup? If there was not a riot, PAS was not co-opted into BN, would that happen? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Farid Alatas from National University of Singapore. Dr. Fida Rahman, just two questions. The party, I don't get the name, the party that you were talking about, which took an anti-Shiite...
JUI. Fazal.
Yeah, Jamiat Ulema, that's right. Took an anti-Shiite position. And then you suggested that among the things that they should revise their anti-Shiite stance. My question is, why would they want to do that? if they stand to gain support from the general population. So that's one question. Could you also comment on Sunni-Shiite relations in Pakistan? Was there a time when there were good relations? Well, I think there were, but the rhetoric is that Shiism is a source of sectarianism. I wonder if you could comment on the changes that took place. Just a couple of questions. First of all, the Kaum Muda, Kaum Tua distinction, I think if I understood you correctly, you said you understood it in terms of a distinction between a more rationalist versus a more conservative approach. I don't know whether that is completely accurate, because there's a significant Salafi strand among the Kaum Muda, and I think you can find a rationalist approach among both the Kaum Muda and the Kaum Tua. Maybe you can comment on that. And finally, what do you understand by progressive, when you say progressive ideas? You know very well there is this notion of progressive Islam, and you have progressive Muslims as kind of a movement, a global movement. How do you understand the word progress vis-a-vis what has come to be known as progressive Islam? Thanks.
Thank you. Please keep short.
Yeah, I'll try to. All the papers were very eloquent and very well presented. My first question goes to Mr. Fida Rahman. I would like to know that in Pakistan, certain Islamist elements has been always on the forefront and vanguard of promoting jihad. So in that context, Kashmir issue was very important. These Pakistani elements see Kashmir struggle as a kind of an extension, and that needs to be supported. So would you please tell me what is their latest position on that? Have they dropped this agenda of promoting jihad and creating trouble for neighboring country, or it is still being pursued, but for tactical reason it has been dropped? Okay. My second question to Dr. Husnul Amin. I would like to know that Jamiat Islami by Maulana Maududi was formed, and goalpost of the Jamiat Islami was to create Islamic State, as you yourself stated. But over the last 50 years, and more than that, I think they have failed to deliver that. Somehow they have not achieved. So would you please tell me whether this goalpost has been dropped? This goal, which was to create Islamic State, Islamize Pakistan, and in a Muslim-dominated country, that goalpost has been changed. They are now fond of electoral politics, though initially when it was formed like Jamiat Islami in India, we have counterpart. They were also against this electoral politics, entering into this all kind of elections, etc., but now they are all just a minute. So what do you think these underlying factors that why Jamiat Islami, despite being a very dominant Muslim country, this has failed to realize? Though on the street it seems that they enjoy very, very high support, but in electoral politics their result is not that. Please, thank you.
Thank you. Very short.
A very important
like
question.
10 seconds.
Because no one asked this question. So this question is directed to my friend Saiful. I read in one newspaper, I'm not sure about this, you are past member. I hope it's wrong information. So my question is, what made past leadership rejected the idea of progressive? Why? Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. So we have less than 2 minutes. Please try to be short. You cannot answer all questions, it's for sure. Try to cover them quickly. We will continue during the break.
I have 8 questions, so I think I won't be able to handle it.
Okay, we'll try to handle in 3 minutes then.
Yeah, what is Pakistan's role in South Asian? You know, the bone of contention is Kashmir. Both Pakistan and India is actually problematic in South Asian context. So unless they both come to some peaceful conclusions about disputes, so I would not blame only India, I would not blame only Pakistan. Both are actually part of the problem. Then manifestos, yes, if they are public documents, they are legitimate document of academic analysis. We cannot deny that once political parties issue their manifestos and platforms, then why not? Yes, academicians are supposed to be legitimately analyzing, questioning, debating, discussing these documents because these are public documents. So same is the case with JI and JIUIFs. Then they tell us about change as well. So the Jamaat Islami's, for example, new manifesto is giving you a new list of issues which was not included in 1997. And this, it gives you a shift in their political priorities as well. So legitimately, these can be studied both. The JI, JIUI, they collaborate with each other as well, because we know of MMA, which is, some people call it Mullah Military Alliance, but this is Muttahida Majlis Amal. So it's a united action front, and recently they have come together as well. So they collaborate with each other, and but the JIUIF is more open to secular politicians as well. So they have been collaborating with PPP, the nationalist parties, ANP, and other progressive parties as well. Lack of tolerance for new ideas, yes. I think Ali Salman Bhai was asking this question. So I would say yes and no. And he's saying this is a global trend. All political Islamists resist, and they do not actually incorporate progressive ideas. I would say yes and no. Yes, I would agree with you. For example, Jamaat Islami is a typical example of not welcoming new ideas, progressive ideas, and they expel new intellectuals. But An-Nahda may be a good example of accepting, accommodating new ideas, An-Nahda in Tunisia. So I think it's a mixed thing, depending on conditions, situations, and the movement culture, the culture of the movement as well. Sunni-Shia relations, I think he will respond to that. But if you just keep this militancy factor aside, then I think you can better understand the Shia-Sunni, because there is one dimension where the Taliban and the militants, they attack, especially Shias, and then you should also keep in mind the Saudi-Irani rivalries, which are much visible in Pakistani politics as well, Pakistani universities and Pakistani madaris. So if you eliminate these two factors, you can better understand the real social, the Shia-Sunni relations, the real social setting in Pakistani context. The last discussion was about the JI. So the JI couldn't develop as a popular movement. The recent electoral results shows that it is consistently declining even the support base in those traditional constituencies as well, and the northwest region as well. I think it's not a political party, it's more a cult, having more like ideological underpinnings, more rooted in discussions about more ideologies and things which are actually not very pragmatic. And the reason is leaders of the Jamaat Islami do not actually come from streets, from popular basis. They come, and there are some piety assessment criterion on which actually the leaders are elevated from the status of a supporter to a status of a popular leader, but that remains within the cult. And the cult is not becoming a popular movement. These questions are taken up within the ranks and files of Jamaat Islami as well. The time is short, so I cannot respond. Okay.
I have been asked 3 questions. 2 of them have been answered by Dr. Ozlem. The last question was about the GUI's stance on Kashmir issue. So, Maulana Fazlur Rahman is against the violence in Kashmir from the day first. And it is interesting to note that when Maulana Masood Azhar got freedom from the Indian jail, then he was specially invited by Maulana Fazlur Rahman, and he tried to convince him to leave the path of jihad and join us in the political struggle for the in the Kashmir issue. But they did not. I don't know why, but he was not convinced, and he formed his own jihadist party called Jaish-e-Muhammad. So he is also the chairman of the Kashmir Committee, that is standing committee of the National Assembly of Pakistan, and he is repeatedly trying to convince all the religious party, including the jihadist organizations, the militant organization, to tackle the issue of Kashmir peacefully and democratically.
Thank you.
Right, quite a few questions there. The first one was about Islam has become a trend and everyone is using Islam to win votes and so on. And I think this is the reality of politics in many parts of the developing world. It's identity politics. It's not really based on policies, and not many people are talking about good governance. Malaysia is coming... Is that me or is that somebody else? Malaysia is going to face our general election in the next few months, and I've been traveling around the country just interviewing people, trying to identify what are the issues that they talk about. There are 2 main issues that come to the front, and one is concerned about the economy, rising cost of living and so on. But number 2, and this issue number 2 actually trumps issue number 1, is identity politics. What happened to Islam? What happened to the position of our ethnic group, the Malays, and so on. So it's not just Islam being used for winning votes and making it as a trend. I think it's the issue of identity politics and appealing to the most basic concerns that people show, that voters show, especially in developing countries when public policy, good governance are not really the mainstream discussion that's taking place. This relates to the question asked by Ali about is intolerance an inherent weakness in political Islam? I think there are 2 ways of looking at this. Number 1, as soon as you become emotional about anything, intolerance comes into play, and religion is a very emotional issue. So that is one aspect of it. But secondly, if you're a political party, if you're a politician, and this is why I don't really trust politicians, if you're a politician, you want to win votes, how do you do that? You do that by appealing to the sentiment that will make the voters vote for you. And it is a brilliant political strategy to abuse religion, right? So if you are a politician wanting to keep power, and you know that the public, your majority of your voters are concerned about particular issues, if I was advising them and I want to be really crude about political strategy, I would tell them, go and exploit religion, because this is how you can win. That is the reality of politics in many countries, but not just developing, but in developed countries as well. So I think it is an issue of, it is not just about intolerance, it is about political strategy as well. There are irresponsible people who are failing to provide thought leadership and exploiting the weaknesses in human being by exploiting those emotional issues. Chin Huat asked about why did I ignore UMNO. I'm not ignoring UMNO. When I was writing this is already about 11,000 words. There's a whole section about UMNO coming up in January. If I were to combine, it will become a book. So that there is another segment altogether about UMNO, and I'm looking at UMNO and the split to form the new party Bersatu. Originally, it was supposed to be 1 paper. The limit given to me was 6,000 words. This is already double that. I include UMNO, it becomes a whole thing. So that's why. how sure am I that the progressive ideas will survive? You see, this is the beauty of working in the realm of ideas.
And also, what do you mean by
I have a list of questions here. So, this is the beauty of working in the realm of ideas. Ideas are stronger than any individual and definitely much stronger than any organization. Political parties, civil society organization, institutions can crumble, but idea will always survive. And the challenge, therefore, is to promote those ideas and make it become mainstream. The progressive ideas at the moment in Malaysia, I think, is not the mainstream idea yet, but there are work towards that. And even if the party does not succeed, there will be others who will take it up. Now, the question about PAS and Barisan Nasional and the alliance is a little bit too technical. Maybe we can have a conversation about it later. Professor Farid asked a very important question about my distinction, my definition of the kaum tua, kaum muda, the young and the old. Now, I had to simplify a lot in the presentation, even in the paper. The distinction between the two groups is more nuanced than what can be explained in just 15 minutes. I think for the purpose of understanding them, there are differences from political strategy, there are differences in the creed, in Aqidah aspect, in interpretation of the creed as well. There are differences in the fiqh areas, in how they interpret certain things. Mazli Malik did a good paper in this. It's listed in my reference. I quoted some parts of the paper. I would suggest referring to that in order to understand the bigger difference between the kaum tua and kaum muda. I had to simplify a lot. There is the question about what do I mean by progressive. This is why at the beginning I started by saying that the Parti Amanah, the proper term for them is neoconservative. It is not progressive. Because to me, progressive ideas, I do not subscribe to, well, I would distinguish the interpretation of progressive ideas from the American progressivism, because that's more social democrat. I would say, to me, what I mean when I speak about progressive ideas is the belief in the concept of individual liberty and individual responsibility. That has to be the core, and that is not coming up to the front yet. When we talk about any political party, it is always about the role of the state. I think we need to shift that into individual responsibility. That's not quite happening yet. And the last one is what made past leaders reject the progressive ideas, and the question was whether I'm a member of PAS or not. You see, everybody made mistakes. I did join PAS back in, I started working or being involved in PAS in 1992. No, the mistake part is a joke. There's a real reason behind that. But I started working with the party in 1992. I became a member in 1997. In fact, until today, I still carry membership card. I still have it with me. I am a lifelong member of the party. I think eventually they will kick me out, but let's wait for that to happen. But the reason why the progressive are rejected is because PAS at the core is a conservative party. You try to bring in different elements, you will be kicked out. In the same way that, in a particular conference, we are discussing all these different ideas. Suddenly, if someone were to come to campaign, advocate, ask a question even about a particular issue that is not jiving in with what the majority is talking about, he will be isolated. And this is what happened. This was what happened in PAS, and it was rejected because they came from two very different schools of thought. And I think it's really difficult to reconcile the two. Thank you.
Just very quickly, because my discussion was the larger context of change which is actually happening in Pakistan. So just I would very quickly mention, Pakistan is now observing the fastest urbanization growth in South Asia, which is around 3.2%. So you see new urban centers developing, the villages modernizing, urbanizing, and the cities are modernizing as well. The second is the emergence. Now the empirical studies have estimated that 35% of the population has joined the middle class by consumption. And that middle class, which actually started off in the last 30 years after the oil boom in Middle East with the remittance and with the new entrepreneurial class, now we have more than 35% as middle class by consumption. So you have a new consumer culture which is visible on roads, in the markets, and everywhere. And the third thing is the rise of new neoliberal university. So in the last 10 years, we are witnessing now a tremendous growth in university campuses. So there were only 30 universities just 10 to 15 years back. Now we have 200 universities. Only the capital city of Islamabad is having 26 universities. So these universities are actually providing new public sphere for new discussions on science, on religion, religious reform, politics, society. And these discussions are actually leading to reforms within the political parties as well. So that was actually important to just to
Thank you.
discuss.
We have to be back in 15 minutes at 12.